Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our very first kitchen table talk with Parks Canada. My name's Kelsey, and before we begin, it is my honor to introduce Elder Rita Gordon, who will be opening our meeting in a good way with prayer. Elder Rita is the past executive senator for the Métis Nation of Ontario, and last October, she was appointed to the Grandmothers Council as Ontario's grandmother. Thank you so much for being with us, Grandmother Rita, and over to you for some prayers.
Thank you for inviting me. But before I say my prayer, Elder, is it Norma?
Yes.
Norma, thank you very much for sharing a little bit. You're going to hear powerful stories, as yours is. I ask everyone at this table to remember you and the other people with you in their prayers tonight and many nights, to give you strength. May the Creator bless you. Chanchi Yuao Menatuao. Hello everyone and welcome. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue. We pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long relationship with this territory, which remains unceded, unsurrounded. Nous rendons hommage aux peuples algonquins, gardiens traditionnels de cette terre. Nous reconnaissons le lien sacré de longue date, unissant à ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. Just 8 short days ago, it was National Women's Day. We all attended something for our women, the important women of the Métis Nation and Parks Canada. And I want to read you the Woman's Strengths Prayer. Women have strengths that amaze men. They bear hardships and they carry burdens, but they share happiness, love, and joy. They smile when they want to scream. They sing when they want to cry. They cry when they are happy and laugh when they are nervous. They fight for what they believe in. They stand up to injustice. They don't take no for an answer when they believe there is a better solution. They go without so their family can have. They go to a doctor with a frightened friend. They love unconditionally. They cry when their children excel and cheer when their friends get awards. They are happy when they hear about a birth or a wedding. Their hearts break when a friend dies. They grieve at the loss of a family member, yet they are strong when they think there's no strength left. They know that a hug and a kiss can heal a broken heart. Women come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. They'll drive, fly, walk, run, or email you to show you how much they care about you. The heart of a woman is what makes the world keep turning. They bring hope and love. They have compassion and ideas. They give moral support to their families and friends. Women have vital things to say and everything to give. However, if there is one flaw in woman, is that they forget their worth. Creator, please help the women, those gather here, realize how they are loved, valued, and appreciated by you and all who know them. Please pass this along to your friends to remind them just how amazing they are. Amen. Thank you. Merci, merci. Miigwech Kuyanamig.
Merci. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for opening this circle in a good way. I just really
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank you very much.
your prayers. Oh, it's such an honor to have those words get our conversation started. And we're happy to have everyone gathered, those of you watching live, those who will be watching in the future. So thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I want to introduce the amazing speakers that we have here with us today. And really the intention of today's talk is to share stories and deepen and strengthen the relationships that we share. So in addition to Grandmother Rita with us, I'm honored to have several speakers around the table. Elder Norma Spicer is joining us today. Norma has a passion for Métis history and culture honed from a family history that includes Louis Riel, the 1885 Métis resistance. Now retired, she is a knowledge holder for the Métis Nation of Alberta and sat on Indigenous traditional knowledge panels at the federal, provincial, and community levels. Thank you for being here, Elder Norma. It's my pleasure to introduce my collaborator and treasured colleague, Sharon Morin, who had the original idea to have this conversation in this way as a kitchen table talk. Sharon is the project coordinator with LFMO Otipemswak, Women of the Métis Nation, and works on projects related to climate, biodiversity, honoring Mother Earth, and being generous with her teachings. Thank you, Sharon. Moving around the table, we are honored to have Cindy Gaudette here for this talk with us. Cindy is an auntie, sister, and cookum. She belongs to a strong lineage of Métis women's families along the South Saskatchewan River and farming communities near Bellevue, Batoche, St. Laurent, St. Louis, and One Arrow, Saskatchewan. She has ties to the French-Canadian relations through her father's family, and she is an assistant professor at the Campus Saint-Jean, University of Alberta, and Canada Research Chair in Métis kinship and land-based wellness. She brings values of relationality and reciprocity to her research in an effort to ensure that Métis women's expression of sovereignty is at the forefront of health and well-being initiatives. Thank you, Cindy. And completing our circle, we're honored to have Natalie Pepin with us today. Natalie is a cultural educator through Meeting My Ancestors, a Métis arts and culture organization that she founded. As an Indigenous woman, Natalie seeks to bring her traditions, stories, and culture to life. She lives in Northern Alberta on an off-grid homestead where she offers traditional skills and Indigenous arts-focused classes, sharing topics such as brain tanning, moccasin making, beading, traditional Métis silk embroidery, and building relationships with the land. Natalie studied environmental sciences at Lethbridge College and is a graduate of Harvard University with an ALB degree. Natalie hopes to connect her community with the skills, arts, language, stories, and culture of the Métis Nation. It's an incredible honor to have these amazing women around the virtual table, and I know we want to get right into hearing from them. And so in our first round of the circle, I will just pass to my colleague Sharon Morin first to tell you all a little bit about why we wanted to have this event today, where the kind of inspiration came from, what we hope you'll all get from it. And so she'll share a little of that background with you, and then I'll invite each of the speakers just to tell us a little bit about themselves and their stories so they can introduce themselves to you in their own words. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Kelsey, after I do this, do you want me to introduce myself and then pass it on? Okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
Just wanted to clarify. Sorry, everybody. So why have we gathered today? So there was a meeting last year with Parks Canada and MNC, and it was very productive, but there was also definitely a need and a want for more conversation to happen. So talking with Kelsey, you know, one of the things that is really magical about Métis kitchens is the kitchen table and all of the good conversations that happen around there, whether they're about family or politics or community development or whatever. It's at the table where it happens. So we thought that we would organize a kitchen table talk with Parks Canada and bring in some really amazing speakers to kind of help start to gear and maybe pivot some of the interpretation when it comes to Métis land use and Métis on the land and Métis women's perspective of being on the land. So it's a hope that this will be one of many that we can maybe do, and maybe have them focused by topic or province or whatever maybe parks would like to talk about, and we can be able to facilitate that and bring the people forward to be able to help you with that interpretation. So I have almost a 20-year past profession with the Musée Héritage Museum in St. Albert. I started there as, at that time, Aboriginal programmer. I was brought in on contract to build programs around the Métis history in St. Albert, which included them having two river lots, the stewardship of the Father Lacombe Chapel, which is a provincial site, but St. Albert looks after it, and the Little White Schoolhouse. So after I became program manager, I was in charge of all of those sites. A lot with the provincial site, the Father Lacombe Chapel, one of the things that the contract had with the Arts and Heritage Foundation was that we would be part of the training for that site. The provincial training book that they gave them was a big blue binder filled with things that had just been printed off. So there wasn't a lot of hands-on. Even the bannock recipe was very, very questionable in there. And it was dangerous what they were telling them to do actually in the manual. So we took the manual and we just took it away. Actually, we just took it away. And we sent them to their provincial training, but we became part of that provincial training. And not only with interpreters from the Father Lacombe Chapel, but interpreters through all the Northern Alberta sites. So the ones that were in Victoria Settlement and Dunvegan and places like that. So I was the one that would bring in the hands-on Métis first-hand experience or second-hand experience, depending on how I learned it, about living on the land and our traditions and our cultures. So I have extensive experience in program development, but also interpretation and in training interpreters. And I'm a proud Métis woman who lives in Amiskwaciy-Waskagan, which is Edmonton House. We have our space in St. Albert called Michif Cultural Connections, which is the cultural space where we teach classes to anybody that wanted to come. So we're open, and I work now with LFMO to Pimsawak, and then partnering with Métis National Council. And I'm really excited to be working with Kelsey here to bring this format to you all. So thanks so much, and I'll pass it off to Elder Norma. Oh, you're muted.
Right now?
Yeah. There you go. You're good.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I live in Edmonton. I worked for the Métis Nation until I retired 7 years ago. And in my capacity there, I volunteered on their culture team, which was to make sure that our culture, our stories, and that were accurate and true. Did a lot of research. And when I retired, after about 6 months, I was asked to come back as a knowledge holder and do some more research, which I did. And then I started getting involved with the many different programs that were in and around Edmonton, with different departments, different levels of government. And I think at the time, there was an awful lot of tables where it was just First Nations people that were at the table. And so they wanted me to be voiced in there. And I became the one that they would send to all of these events. A lot of them were focused on the environment. And that is something that is so precious to our Métis people, to Indigenous people as a whole, and our love of the land and how we feel that we are part of that cycle of nature that we just feel such a bond towards it. And our people have always enjoyed being outdoors. They enjoy like your parks, the nature, working with nature, working our children with nature. So I've really enjoyed watching all of the camps that they've had. Especially now, we have a historical site at Métis Crossing. We bring families out there. I let them experience nature, and we bring them out to Pigeon Lake, and we let them experience ice fishing and all sorts of different things that they're doing. And it's so important that we have our camps, and we're looking forward to here in the city because Edmonton is looking at a urban park. So I'm looking to a future in that. Thank you. Do you want me to pass it on to someone else?
Yeah, we'll move to Cindy next in the circle. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and hello to all our listeners. It's a bit odd to not be seeing you, so I'm imagining that you're comfortable wherever you are. And I just want to give thanks to Elder Rita, and good to see you again. But years ago that I seen you when I was living in Ontario, and how appropriate to begin by thinking about the strength of women, and starting with that beautiful poem and prayer to kind of set the tone of this talk as we're sitting at a kitchen table with my tea. And I often think about the kitchen table as kind of the authority in our household that was governed by the women. So I appreciate the invitation and the vision, Sharon, and also to meet Natalie and Norma. My mom's name is Norma, so I can't help but when thinking about telling a little bit about myself is also thinking about my mom and my aunties and my grandmothers, and how appropriate that there's a Norma at the table because that's my mom's name. And Sharon, I think I was thinking of your mother, who was so foundational in when I first started my research in 2007. Oh God, the love of that woman. And I still see her, and I still think about when she told me when she became our first Métis women senator in Canada. And she says, I might not have a doctorate at university, but I have a doctorate in life. And, so thinking about where I'm situated right now, I live in Amaskwaciwas-Kahigan. But as Kelsey mentioned, I'm from Key, Saskatchewan. I grew up on a farming community, as she mentioned in my bio. And I go home, and I've bought a land with my sister along the River Road. And so I spend my summers in the Batoche, Saint Laurent region, and I've set up my research center in the St. Louis community, and really looking at the stories of our women along the South Saskatchewan River from the perspective of the families and my own family. So I think about a couple years ago, or during COVID, during this difficult time, visiting with my mom, and and the changes of her aging and cognitive changing, and recovering from COVID, and I'm helping her get ready. And I looked at her, and all I could say is, Mom, you're so courageous, and in that very kind of vulnerable, intimate moment. And she says, no, ma fille, on a été élevé comme ça. Meaning, I'm not courageous, we were raised that way. And so that made me think about what that meant. And so part of my passion or interest is really drawing on the wisdom and the strength of our Métis mothers and aunties and grandmothers that are still very active, as we see at the table and in many ways on our Métis homeland. So merci, and look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. We'll move to Natalie next in the circle.
Anshi, kakiao kiwao, kakisimo isqueo nitsikasun, maga Natalie Pepin dishnikashun, Winnipeg Kostinia, maga tawatinao ni weekend equa, Isqueo Pimshaknia ou bien Pam Bechifnia, Cuthbert Grant, Pay Pierre, Pay Mary Falcon, Pay Janvier Richot, Pay Marguerite L'Espérance, Pay Marie Lavallee, Ni Parenti Kaya Shoshchinia. Hello, everyone. It's so, I'm so happy to be here and meet you and to sit with you. My name in Cree is Prayerful Woman. My name that my family gave me is Natalie Pepin, and I'm originally from Winnipeg, or Winnipeg in Heyoewin. And I now live in the Tawatina Valley, or Tawatinau, which is about an hour and a half north of Edmonton, half an hour south of Athabasca, right smack dab in our nation's homeland, as much as when I was being brought up in Winnipeg. And I'm a Métis woman. I like to start at the beginning, and so I shared with you the names of my dear, dear, dear family members from whom I inherit this beautiful culture, including Cuthbert Grant and his sister Marie Grant, who married Pierre Falcon. And these are my great, 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 great grandparents, along with Janvier Richot, or Jean-Baptiste Richot, as he is more commonly understood to be, as we all had many names back then, and that was normal. And Marguerite L'Espérance, who was a daughter of the fur trade and was born in Fort Benton, Montana. But her mother and grandmother actually lead me right back to this valley where I am living now. This is my family's ancestral homeland, the same as Saint-François-Xavier, just west of Winnipeg. So I am so happy to be here and to share a perspective that I inherit through those beautiful family members who I have so much respect for, and to sit with these beautiful women who are people that I look up to. And I mentioned to Cindy before we went on, I have an academic crush on her, and you know, the same with all of these amazing people that we're gathered with today. So I'm so happy to be here. You know, when we're asked to tell our stories, I have to start my story there. And then I can continue and say, you know, I moved from Manitoba at the age of 14 to Alberta, and I felt really alone. I knew who I was in Manitoba. Nookum, my grandmother, Frances Plouffe, she made sure we understood who we were. She's a strong woman with a strong personality. And moving to Alberta, as a Métis person, it was really interesting to try and situate myself. And so I learned in the way that our ancestors did how to connect with the land and to center myself in that land. And with the teachings of Keteea, or elders in English, I learned about our relationship to the land, and that became the foundation of everything I do today. So in the introduction offered for me, it was mentioned I teach arts and land-based skills, and I do. However, I do so, you know, all of those skills and beautiful arts that we have are all about our land-based teachings. They're not separate from our land teachings. They're all one and the same. They're different parts along that journey of knowledge. And so when I teach beadwork, I teach about those flowers that we love so much. And when I teach about tanning, we're using that animal raised on the prairies. We just butchered a buffalo last week here on the land where I live, and reclaiming those land-based skills of smoking meat to make pimican or pastéuias, dry meat. And all of this is our culture. Our culture isn't something over here, and then all the arts and skills and language are over here. It's all one and the same. And what centers all of those things, what centers and cradles our culture, is our relationship with the land. I am continually thrilled to partner with the Métis Nation of Alberta to offer our traditional plant camps across all the regions in Alberta, which we will do again this year, where we learn about our relationship with the plants as medicine and food. I also host the Wasakam Indigenous food sovereignty camps on the land where I live 4 times a year, where we hands-on learn not only about the skills and relationships we have, but we participate in them. And I think this is a really important piece of what I want to touch on today is our culture isn't one of performance. It's one of participation. It's one of practice. And so when we talk about the land, taking selfies with a marsh in the background or, with the mountains or whatever, what have you, is lovely. However, that's not part of our culture. Our culture is being in relationship with all of those things. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation with such amazing people about those relationships. So hi, thank you for having me here.
Thank you all for being here. As everyone in the audience can tell, we have an incredible lineup of really powerful Métis women here to share with us. And we want to invite you all to share your thoughts as well as this conversation unfolds. On our lovely platform for this virtual event, there's an option to share your thoughts and submit those, and we'll all be able to read them afterwards and reflect on the things that you're sharing from the audience as well. So we'll do a next round on the circle and get right into some of the discussion questions. And here I would love for you all to share with us and tell us about lands and waters in the homeland that you have a special relationship and connection with. And if there are parks or historic sites that you're connected to. So we'll start this round of the circle with Elder Norma first, and then move to Sharon and Cindy and Natalie around the circle again. So over to you, Elder Norma. Thank you.
Edmonton, that a national park is our Elk Island Park, and it's has so many ties to our Métis community. People that were there, people who lived by the park, along with other Indigenous nations. But the parks themselves have always, now, especially now that they're going back to nature in a lot of their areas, is such a wonderful experience to be able to go to these parks and feel that you're, on the land, that you're in nature. It's so comforting. For historical sites, Métis Crossing, which is about an hour and a half drive from Edmonton, northeast, and it's a beautiful site along the river, the North Saskatchewan River, that our ancestors used to travel by this site, and they had a landing there where they, would come up onto the land. We had many Métis living in the area, so there was a lot of trading back and forth, and we acquired that land, or the Métis Nation acquired that land for our people, and now that it is a historical site, it is a place where we bring our children back. And now we have buffalo on the land, and we have elk. And I think that from the national park, I think they're from Elk Island. I believe that we got some more buffalo from them as well. And I'm so pleased, because the buffalo to me means so much. I mean, to me, they're the ones that are going to. It's animals like this that will restore our land if we can only get enough of them in numbers to help with that. I just recently watched a series called The Ecological Buffalo, and it's almost like a miracle the way that they can restore the land and bring it back to where it was, and how important it is for us to have these reserves and areas like Elk Island, where our animals are safe, and we can grow the numbers again. I am concerned about the chronic waste disease, that are affecting right now so many of our deer population, and I'm just praying that we do find a vaccine, but also that it's not transmitted on to our other animals. There's so much work that we expect out of the ones that look after our parks, and I really look up to you people that are there out there, looking after our parks, making sure that the ecological systems are balanced again. And I really commend you for your work. Thank you. Back to you.
Hi, everybody. So when I thought of this question, I thought of where I grew up, because that's the land that I'm attached to, and that's Lesser Slave Lake. Lesser Slave Lake is very dear to me. It's a place where I go to the water and it's healing for me. It's not the town. It's not even really people. It's the lake, and it's the land around the lake. Like the forest, the trees. There's sand dunes there that we used to go 4x4ing in. There's jack pine forests that we would go explore in and, get lost and have fun. And it was a time when we could, you could ride your bikes to the lake and you could fish and drink right out of the water, like right out of the river that fed into the Lesser Slave Lake. There was no concern about, anybody getting sick from it or the fish not being healthy. And you were able to build a small little fire along the river and cook your fish without having to worry about, forest fires, and you contained it. You did all of that. So it's a place that I still long for a lot in my heart. I try to get out there, but I don't always get out there. And then there's for me Lois Hole Provincial Park, Big Lake, and the historic St. Albert sites are places that are very near and dear as well. They tell the story of the Métis in Alberta. It's the place where the Métis Nation was birthed, was in St. Albert. The Métis lived along the river. The families did while the men worked the fort. My family was living along the river while the family member worked the fort. So those places where I'm attached to culture and where I'm attached to the land and where I know that my ancestors have walked are what connect me. And so when interpreting and getting the chance to take people on tours, I kind of talk really, really fast because I get really excited about bringing people out there. Because it's not only our culture and our history, it's a huge part of the history and the historic story of Alberta. And you'd find that in every province with the Métis story. So I think it just lends itself to the broader, story of interpretation and what you could add into your interpretive skills as you're moving on and visiting with people, right? And it's really, and I really loved what Natalie had to say. It's not about the pictures and that. It is about our connection to the land and how we feel when we stand by that tree and we feel that connection with the Wahkohtowin, and we know that we're all the same. That's how I feel. So yeah, I think that's what I would say about that one. Marcy.
Merci. Cindy, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, so great to hear different areas of the land that I hadn't would consider or think about from a Métis perspective. So thank you, Norma, and Sharon, for that. It's kind of expanding my own connection to land in that sense. I guess for me, when I think about that connection to the land, I think about my Nimama. My first understanding of my land is my mother. My first understanding of my waters is the womb of my mother. And so that's been a big kind of growing awareness within me, is that connection to mother, to my understanding of mother, and then extending that in terms of connection to the physical land. And so growing up, I guess, in thinking about, again, my mothers, it's like the berries, and my grandmothers, and how that was how they took care of a whole family. And I think about harvesting those berries and the labor along that South Saskatchewan River and different areas we used to go to growing up in that whole region. And so I think about that connection every time I see the Saskatoon, Ulisris, Ulipaka, and the labor of the grandmothers and my mothers and my aunties, and how many berries it took for us to, tying the baskets, tying the pail, ice cream pail with a belt around, and just spending hours and doing that work. And so I also think about, I think about that place, the practices, especially the berry picking, the pilgrimage site that we used to go to right across the river, and the whole enacting our Kiukewin, our visiting there, and going to the buffalo jump, which was a whole play area we used to go. And it's only in the last few years that I'm hearing or thinking about the significance of that to our Métis families through the stories of, my aunties, Sophie McDougall and Doris and Maria, and the work with the River Women Collective. And so that's kind of been returning through the work I've been doing with the women. And especially, I want to just speak to, in the last few years, hosting with the River Women Collective at Parks Canada in Batoche at the East Village, and the work of Dr. Cheryl Troop, and the stories that are still of our families in that area, remembering the women who were occupying and taking care of our relations during the resistance of 1885, that were my grandmother's grandmothers, and the Lavallées and Lepine and Boucher and Boyer women. So we're, when I hear you talk about Marguerite L'Espérance, well, that's Caroline is my grandmother's grandmother, who came from the Red River area in 1882 and settled along that area. Now I have land where Josette and Maxime Lepine, just a kilometer down the road, and hearing the perspectives that they would have named places by families. So Bushyfield and Lepine Flats. And so there's a whole new connection that is occurring as a result of those living stories and that work that we did with the River Women Collective, and just working in close partnership with Parks Canada in Batoche. And also the women there who make me feel at home when I go into parks. If it wasn't for Brenda and Jackie, and their way of being, and always creating that space where we are at home. We are at home as a result of those relationships with those women who are there holding that space and making us feel at home when we arrive and when we're on that spaces. So those are, a bit in terms of my connections growing up, and also the growing relationships as a result of returning home after having left Saskatchewan in my early 20s, I guess, but always having that connection, like you were saying, Sharon, within, my niece reminded me the land always remembers who we are. And it's, how do we remember the land? And it's sometimes through those stories or through the harvesting and just being present, right? Sitting along the river, or thinking about the food harvesting that would have occurred, or those stories, or Berry Island that the aunties speak about. So anyway, I could talk for days, but I'm going to pass it to Natalie. So I'll see. Great question.
Hi. Yeah, when I think about my relationship with the land and where did that all start, my first memories are of catching frogs near Saint-Pierre-Joli, where I grew up, which is really close to St. Malo in southern Manitoba. And those unstructured times on the land as a child, spending time among all those relations, those trees, those grasses, the hair of our mother. And then I also think about the importance of learning to explore and experience the land when we moved to Alberta. I found myself in southern Alberta among our Blackfoot kin, and really learning from their perspective of what it means to come into another territory and to begin to learn that place. So I want to sometimes when I'm answering questions, I answer the question I wish I was asked. And so I'm going to do that. And for me, you know, it's not so much the parks that I have a relationship with, it's the parts of my mother. And Cindy mentioned this and Sharon mentioned this just before me, that she is literally our mother. And I, you know, sometimes we say things and it sounds really pretty, but it's not pretty words. It is literal, that this land is our mother. She birthed us. She birthed us culturally, that this is where our culture comes from. This is where it developed from. And it was the land that taught us all of the arts, skills, the language. If you take our language to Australia, it doesn't make sense anymore because we're not describing things from our homeland. And so that's where our culture comes from. And so when I say my mother, I mean it literally, that when I walk outside, I am deeply aware that I am walking on the surface of my mother. And that perspective is how I'm going to answer this question, that what parts of her do I have a special affinity for? And, you know, if you all think of your mother, you're going to think of perhaps how she looked. Or perhaps you're going to think of, you know, maybe she had this way that her hair parted and you just remember that thing about her. And we have these beautiful, dear feelings when we think of those mothers or even aunties or caretakers that we've had. And so I'm going to think of those parts of her that I feel so deeply connected to. And a lot of that is where I live right now in the Tuatna Valley. I see these poplar trees that are so vigorous. You know, when farmers call them ditch weeds, I'm like, oh no, they're just really vigorous, strong relatives, those standing up people. And I think about springtime that's coming so soon here, and all the frogs. I love the frogs. Growing up in southern Manitoba, oh, the frogs. When we moved to southern Alberta, it's very dry and there's not many frogs. And so being up here now, I get to hear their songs as they wake up our mother in springtime. They sing her awake. She gets a lovely alarm clock of frog songs. And so I can think of that. But even more so, I think about how I feed my family, and that everything I have comes from my mother, whether it's the berries, the blueberries and Saskatoons, the hazelnuts that grow all along here. And it's the fish, it's the white fish that we love smoking and eating. And it's those pasqua mostos or libuflu, it's those buffaloes and all the other big animals, you know, the moose and the deer and the elk that we feed our families with. That's what I think of. That's what I connect to on the land. And it happens that some of the parks intersect with those places. The parks are like modern boundaries that never held our culture. They exist now and we acknowledge them. And, you know, I think when I look west, I think how beautiful those huge grandfathers are who carry the stories since the creation of the earth. They've been here that long. Holy, they're so smart. They've got to know all the stories. And so I think of them and how awe-inspiring it is to be in their presence, listening to those stories that they whisper and grumble as I walk through those spaces. So when I think about how I connect to the land, it's in real time. It's in daily activities. It's the walk and the crunching of the leaves underfoot as I go for a walk. It's the medicines that, you know, I pick medicines around where I live and I make the medicines for my family. And that's our culture in practice. And it's about a relationship with that land. There's this one that's going to be ready so soon called Lilière, which is a salve that we make from the balsam poplar tree. And, you know, building a relationship and knowing where those trees are and where they're doing so well, where they're so healthy. That's the relationship with these spaces. Now, if I was to pick a park or perhaps an ecosystem that represents a park, I would say that all the parkland and grassland areas like Elk Island are where I feel most connection to, which of course we are a buffalo nation. We are a nation born on the prairies. And so that parkland prairie edge, oh, that feels so good to be in those spaces. Hi, thank you.
Merci. Thank you, Natalie. Grandmother Rita, any reflections from this part of the conversation?
Well, first of all, I must say how I envy you women. You lived that life. I didn't. I was born and raised in Ottawa, one of 8 children with a sick mother, in and out of the hospital all the time, except when she had the last baby, they discovered cancer. And I was 14 and I had to quit school to stay with her. For 6 years, she died. And I raised my brothers and sisters, but before my mother got sick, we used to go play by the Ottawa River because during the war, you couldn't get a place to live. There were no houses being built and things like that. So a bunch of people went squatting next to the Ottawa River. And the first thing in the morning, my mother let us go because my uncle had a 2-room shack. They were all 2 rooms. There were Métis people. I didn't know Métis people. There were First Nation people. I didn't know them. They were English. They were French. They all got along. They all shared their food. And we used to go to the Algonquins. Now they had 8 children. And we'd go in and the little boy or the little girl would say, Mommy or Daddy, they're staying for supper. They needed another mouth to feed. But they were like that, the Algonquins. They shared everything. And at night, we'd take the oil lamp and we'd go and read the funnies on the wall because that was their wallpaper. And they brought, in the coldest nights, they brought their horse in the kitchen. And I always thought, well, it's so cold, they're heating their horse. But the horse was heating the house. I never knew that. But I knew there was something hidden in my family. I knew that. And we found out that my mère, French, and she spoke funny. She was speaking Michif.
Mm.
And she said to me once, she used to clean offices and I'd go with her on Saturday morning. I'd empty the waste buckets.
Mm-hmm.
She said about my father's mother, she said in French, ta mère Kiki, c'est une sauvagesse, puis elle veut pas le dire. On n'en parle pas. Your mère Kiki, she always called her mère Kiki. Her name was Kelly. Where she got Kiki, I don't know. But she had her own language.
Mm.
And so I was very nosy, very nosy. And I asked my father once, my mother was sewing in another room and the kids were all playing. And I said, Daddy, are you an Indian? And he said, no, I'm not an Indian. I said, well, you look like an Indian. And your mommy looks like an Indian. Granny Kelly's like the Indians I see in the movies. And he said, no, we're Black Irish. I said, well, what does that mean, Black Irish? Her name was Kelly. And he said, when the Spaniards came to Ireland, they intermixed and they became Black Irish. The next day, my mother said, you have a big mouth. You're too nosy. Don't talk about things you don't understand. So I went to a powwow. I was always attracted to first of all, I'll tell you about how these men lived on the river. I didn't know they were living from the land. They fished, they hunted. They grew stuff. They would take us all and talk about these wild things in the forest that we could eat, the ones that you couldn't eat. So they knew how to live off the land. So anyway, in 1993, I went to a powwow, and I was waiting for my sister. She was going to the washroom, and there was a little kiosk, and there was a girl there. It happened to be Christy Belcourt. And there was the flag. And I said, what's all this about? And she said, oh, my father's starting up the MNO for the Métis. I said, well, I think that's me. I'm Métis. So anyway, I started. So, okay, that was May 26th, my birthday, 93. And on the 27th, I went and knocked on Tony Belcourt's door. And I said, I'm Métis and I want to work for you. And he said, oh, I'm not hiring. I don't have any money. I said, no, free, a volunteer. Because I was retired and I had no roots to go to. My husband was still working. My friends were working. So anyway, I went in there and I worked every day. We couldn't even afford a filing cabinet. There was Christy and I. So at the AGA, it's going to be 30 years. I'm working for the Métis Nation, and that made a life. So I was working in the registry, just filing. But somebody had to do it. There was nobody but me. So anyway, I started researching, and I knew my father's mother came from Mattawa. So I started calling. I got the Mattawa phone book. In those days, you had a phone book. And I called the library and I said, do you know anybody called Atkinson? And she said, oh, yes. She said, call Mrs. So-and-so. She's an elder around here and she knows everything. So I called her and she said, there's an Atkinson girl. She said, still living. She's the last of the Atkinsons. This is her number. So I called her and she said, yes, I had an Auntie Florence. She was my mother's sister. That was my granny. So I said, but in those days, you said Indian. You didn't say First Nation. And I said, are you an Indian? And she said, oh, I certainly am. All my family was. And I said, can I bring my father up to meet you? So we rented a big van and we all piled in. And I said to Daddy, and you know, your mommy was an Indian. He said, no, Mother would have told us. So anyway, we go and the cousin is First Nation. And she said, yes, your mother was First Nation. And when your father came to marry your mother, he said, we're going back to Ottawa. You can never say you're Indian. I just got on the fire department, no, the police department. They'll throw me off the department and we won't get a place to live. They won't rent to us. So he said, from now on, you're Black Irish. So we were coming home and my father was going like this and he was crying and the tears were running down his nose. And he said, I never knew. Why didn't Mother tell me I was an Indian? So my brother said, Father, you didn't walk in her shoes. She couldn't. So anyway, time went on. And I found all the information I wanted. So anyway, he got dementia, but he remembered the past. And we put him in a home because his second wife had died. And he'd go around and he'd say, hello, my name is Walter Kelly. I'm an Algonquin, you know. And he'd shake everybody's hand. He was so proud. But then I thought, My poor granny went to her grave saying she was Black Irish. She never had any friends. My sister and I'd go sit with her, and she wouldn't talk to us.
Mm.
She'd give us a cup of tea, and she always sat like this. And I said to my sister, she was raised by nuns. She'd sit like this, and she'd go to this, you know, put your hands down, to put your dress down. And that's what the nuns always taught us.
Mhm.
So she was raised by the nuns. But anyway,
So-
my father died happy because he found out that he was an Indian. But it's sad that they went through their lives not being able to say who they were.
Mhm.
Thank goodness today it's all in the open and everybody's proud of it. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing with
You're welcome.
us.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Of
I cried for my father,
course.
not for
Yes.
me, for my father.
That it's a beautiful story on the reclaiming of identity and how that has, you know, such a
That's
relationship to the lands and
That's
waters
right.
too.
Yes.
Yes.
Ottawa River was
Mercy.
our place to escape to.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing the story. I want to start our next question by putting a couple things together. And so to the circle, you know, what is something that you hope Parks Canada knows about the Métis Nation and about Métis culture? And what are your hopes for the future, kind of considering that? So we'll start with Elder Norma and we'll come all the way back around. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I had the privilege of going with our president for the Métis Nation of Alberta, Audrey Puttra. We went to Elk Island when they had a celebration for the reopening of their interpretive center there. So we went, and it was quite an event. I really enjoyed going, and I was quite impressed to see that they had women there from the women's prison who were doing restoration work in the park and working in the park, and so they were part of the ceremonies. And then we went into the cultural center, and it's beautiful. It was beautiful, and it was brand new, and there was artwork all over the walls. There was one piece of artwork that related to Métis. The rest were all First Nations. I was really disappointed that that was the case. The staff seemed to, without realizing it, treated it kind of like pan-Indigenous. And this has to stop when we're dealing with other Indigenous groups. Our culture is very distinct. Our history, our roots are very distinct from the First Nations. And very, very much that we do a lot of work with First Nations, but our culture is different. Our history is different. Our ceremonies are different. Our gatherings are different. And our language is different. We have our own language. And so I would like to see what's happening in the parks is when you're dealing with the stories and that, to make sure that if you do have centers like, for instance, in Batush and well, that one has very much a knowledge of the Métis culture, but in places like Elk Island, to be able to tell the difference so that our story is not lost. I mean, we've been unable to, be in parts of school programs or anything for quite a number of years because we were never accepted as an Indigenous group until the Constitution in when they had the Trudeau's there in 67. But anyways, I wanted to say that our history and our culture has to be recognized. And we have our own artwork as well. If you look at the beautiful beadwork that we do, Ours is a bit different than the First Nations in that we are the flower people. So when you look at our beadwork, you'll see these beautiful roses, the beautiful beadworks and the flowers. We don't use the, I'm trying to think of the English word for the flesh or the arrow symbol. That is not ours. So our people and our moccasins are different. Our music, I mean, most of us all love First Nations music and customs and powwows, but our gatherings are fiddle playing music, the guitar, just it's a whole different experience to come to one of our culture celebrations. And I would encourage, if you want to know more about how we celebrate and the importance of that we have of our kinship relations, which is really big. We get together in huge numbers. We have a Métis Fest in the spring, and we gathered with us last year was at our historic site at Métis Crossing. And we have music that goes until 1 o'clock in the morning. We're tapping our toes, fiddling, jigging. It's just wonderful. And then we have all sorts of programs during the day that our families can experience to learn about their culture. And I think that I would love to see the parks as they're developing, and something that I run across a lot. And this is not a criticism. I'm asking for inclusion. But when I go to meetings and anything to do with culture, the airports, tourism, whatever, I'm usually the token Métis on the panel. And you'll see 8 bands being represented or 10 bands being represented from the surrounding areas. Well, our people also have our areas, our representatives, our knowledge holders that should be at these meetings as well. So I'm just saying, should be more inclusive and and make sure that our culture is recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Norma. What a speech to follow. So important. So what do I think about this question? Well, historically, the Métis were known as the go-betweens, the liaisons. Métis people were bilingual, trilingual, spoke 5-6 different languages, and oftentimes worked as interpreters for newcomers that were coming to this part of the country. And it wasn't so much about the people in that, it was more about teaching those people how to live and look and read the land that they were coming to, because it was so different. So we've always played that role. And it was done in a very good way. In a lot of ways, we still do it. But as Norma has, and I'm gonna build and pick up on what Norma has said. What has happened is that these words like Aboriginal and Indigenous have come out, and they have made us into one group of people. When in actuality, the Indigenous in Canada, or Aboriginal, if you look at the Canadian Constitution, includes First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And so there has to be a distinction when you are doing those interpretive panels, when you are building those interpretive spaces. We need to make sure that the interpreters and the people that are doing that understand that there are 3 different Indigenous groups within Canada. And within the First Nations, there are many different types of First Nations people, and there are many different regional groups of Métis people. So you have to be very aware of the space that you're in and the region that you're in, and include not only just one Métis person. I've felt that many times, Elder, the same thing. I'm the token Métis person in there, and I'm like the squeaky wheel, and sometimes my wheel isn't heard, so it's really important that we have the organizations and branches of the government understand that we are not one people, that we are distinct and separate. We are the First Nations, in this area, it's the Cree, but there's other ones too. There's the Nakota, and we have an Inuit population here now that's quite large, and it's the homeland of the Alberta Métis. And, so we have to remember when we're doing these interpretive panels and we have the opportunity to share history with the people, that we talk about the Métis that also lived on the land, not just the First Nations. I'll pass it off to Cindy.
I'm going to pull the thread also, but first I want to just acknowledge and say thank you, merci to Elder Rita for sharing an important perspective of the struggle of your generation of your mother, because it also reflects the generation of my own mothers and aunties and grandmothers. And that's an important part of our story as well. And also what I've learned in increasingly just visiting with aunties and listening to their story is respecting that effort to hide and what the sacrifices. And I go back to also Senator, your mom, who really helped me work through that, Sharon, in my 20s, like this pain that I was carrying. And she remember, she embraced me in her arms and she says, you need to forgive, but I didn't know what I was forgiving. And so it's certainly by listening and hearing those stories and all the sacrifices, but also the survival, right? It's like making those choices that they did to survive so that we could be here, and having these conversations. And so, and maybe that ties into also recognizing what in response to that question, that parks, create space for those unique family stories that tie to different elements, different stories within the Métis homeland. And that comes from the families and told from family narratives and stories themselves that have had that direct experience, especially our elders that we're so lucky are still with us. Otherwise, I always sometimes have these concerns when they leave. It's like, oh my goodness, there's so much we don't know, so much I don't know. And it's those little nuggets, right, they're so deeply important. So that we know always kind of the struggle of where our relatives came from and the discrimination as it continues today, and the love, right? And the deep, deep love, for our kin. And I see that as parts of, as ways of loving. And so, and I guess one piece that I've been kind of curious about, specifically kind of where I've been spending more time, and the area I grew up in, Batoche. I was looking through some records as I was writing, doing some research, and wondering when Parks Canada established themselves on that land, on Métis homeland. And so it was very kind of hard to find. There's no kind of billboard that says Parks takes over Métis homeland in 1925. And so I think that it would be great for Parks Canada as an institution that has given themselves the authority to preserve and protect lands, to think critically, and to know and to educate on how is it, and I'm still asking that question, what was occurring, for example, in the early 1900s, that Parks Canada becomes the owner of Métis homeland, and how is that a continuity of what occurred in 1885, and what does it mean today when our families are still very well connected, when we have relatives that are in those cemeteries, when our relatives, like I was talking to a cousin, he says, oh, don't say anything too loud. We were at a Louis Riel event. He says, but I used to come visit Auntie Elsina here, ma tante Alexina, Auxil's sister, Auntie Grandma's sister. And he says, like, but it was right here where the interpretive center is. And I'm like, oh my God, like, we need to know that. And what occurred? I want to know what was happening. And so I think Parks Canada has kind of its own important labor and critical examination to do, and giving a voice to what, you know, what occurred, how did they occupy these lands, and they're now the protectors and preserving of the land. So that's one big piece that I've always that I always feel is important to know that story, you know, and to kind of admit it, to not to just say it as it is. Like, how did it happen that Parks is now governing our lands, you know, and therefore we can think differently about the governance as a result, right? We can get beyond this performance of reconciliation, and we can really, like Norma was saying, is like be at the decision-making table of how decisions are made of Métis people on when, especially when you're on Métis homelands, and because we know, as we're hearing and experiencing just from this conversation, is community keeps those spaces very much alive and living through our stories, through visiting, through returning, all of those different ways. We're constantly contributing to the livingness of Métis that interrupts, as though we existed in the past, that interrupts narratives of defeat, and interrupts being forgotten. No, we kind of haven't forgotten, you know, and as we're still remembering, right, in that process. So engaging community, but, you know, putting the resources to, well, once you know you're on Métis homeland and how that came to be, there will be different responsibilities that will be taken, and kind of removing these systematic barriers that makes it difficult to be at the decision-making table, to make it be about how any development occurs on those sites that our relatives lived and thrived and occupied and contributed to the economy, to socially, spiritually, all of those ways, and how we still do. So I think I'm going to leave it there and pass it to Natalie. Hi, merci.
Hey. There's a few things that I would love to share about, you know, what is our relationship with the land at Parks Canada. And the first is to go back to that thread that I was talking about, that ours is a culture not of performance, but of practice. And so many Métis families, like many other Indigenous families across our homeland, have had that connection to the land broken in one way or another, whether it's the dispossession of entire communities of the lands where their Chapans, their great-grandparents had lived, whether it is through those road allowance days of being moved and forced, you know, onto the marginal outskirts of society and then moved continually after that, or whether it's the urbanization of our communities in general, of having land being less and less accessible. So we have this history of deep connection with the land and a period of dispossession from the land. And I don't mean that we possessed the land, but that we are no longer in that relationship with the land for many, many, many Métis people. You know, in talking with the MNA, we're talking about, well, just accessing places to pick blueberries. Like, picking blueberries is this fundamental activity, a childhood memory that should be there for every Métis person, or Saskatoons, or wild strawberries, whatever the berries are in that region. And now even finding those places to go and pick berries can be very difficult. I'm blessed where I live that they're abundant here, but that's not the case everywhere. Much of our homeland has been carved up into agricultural land. And although I participate in agriculture, and that is also a part of my family's history, what it does in practice is it removes spaces for practice of our culture from people within our culture. You know, the land where I live, we have 24 acres here, 24 acres of just traditional Métis landscape, which is incredible. And when people come and they learn about the medicines, and they learn what are the teas that we would drink, you know, that fireweed, that first vegetable, we eat that and we pick that, and it tastes like asparagus, and we call it Métis asparagus. And to be on the land, participating in our culture, is a deeply moving and impactful experience for Métis people who, like so many have expressed here, their families underwent a period of hiding and disconnection from culture, whether it was, a pseudo choice where, it's dangerous to be seen as Métis, and so we will not be seen as Métis, or even if their family was always identifying with our culture, just having those opportunities removed from them by the, agriculturalization of the land around them, so that they can't even access those lands anymore. And so to go back to the land and to participate in our culture by picking fireweed, by picking hazelnuts, by learning how those hazelnuts want to stab you in a million ways if you touch that papery skin. That's a part of the experience of what it means to be Métis, is learning as a child, don't touch that with your skin or you'll be sorry. But all of these things that I can take for granted living on the land where I am, so many people ache for. It's not something that it's just, maybe it's back there in their mind. So many of our people ache to be in relationship with the land, such that they think about it daily. We learn about that Indigenous languages that are not really a part of many of our nation's lives right now, that people whose families once spoke those languages, that they actually think about this on a daily basis. They think about the grief of not having language. It's the same with land. It's the same with our relationship to our mother, that if you take a child from her mother, that child will grieve and that mother will grieve. And that's what's happening within our nation. And in order to remedy the grief, there is a reconciliation. And I don't mean reconciliation as in, we've got these disparate and they need to come together. I mean, we need to reconcile the two. We need to bring those two family members back together, which means our people need to be on the land. And so we have this problem where we've been dispossessed, and many of those spaces that are traditional places for harvesting, for ceremony, for gathering, coming together, parts of our trade routes that are parts of the parks system nowadays. And that these spaces, because of the history and legacy that Cindy was alluding to and asking beautiful, eloquent questions around, can be spaces of reconciliation of our families with their mother, the land. And so in practice, what do I want Parks Canada to know about our connection to the land? That it requires picking berries. And so there's this fundamental issue here with park system and our culture, that we pick the berries and we eat them. And we celebrate and we have feasts with these foods, and we gather on the land and we tend to our mother. We take care of her because that's our inalienable right to care for her. And in order to do that, we have to touch the plants. We can't just walk by and take pictures of them. We can't learn about them in books. We have to go sit with them and be in relationship with them. And so another piece of this is we are told by our Kateak, our elders, that if we're not in relationship with our medicines and our foods, they'll leave, because we have an agreement with them. We have an agreement to be in relationship with the buffalo. We have an agreement to be in relationship with those berries. We have an agreement to be in relationship with all of the plants across our homeland, that we will take care of them, but that we will also enjoy our cultures alongside them, that they're a part of it. And you can't have our culture without the land. It doesn't exist without the land. None of it would make sense without the land. So what I most want Parks Canada to understand is that the system that is currently in place is continuing the damage of separation of our nation from the land by not participating beside us, by not making space for this, by not inviting that reconciliation. The damage is continuing. And it's a hard space to be in, because we also want our mother protected. We also want her to be well cared for, to not be trampled by all the incredible visitors that we have to our homeland. But we also know that if we don't tend to her spirit, if we don't tend to her body, that she's going to be unwell, and that our culture will be unwell. one example I think that is incredible, and I really hope it happens soon, and that discussions have happened around, with Elk Island Park, who are stewards. They take care of, they are midwifing the buffalo back onto the prairies by having these incredible herds. And also, I would say Métis Crossing will fall into this category also, that those buffalo and our people have an absolutely imperative relationship. That again, we are a buffalo people. We are a buffalo culture. They are at the core of how we understand ourselves. And this past week and a couple months ago for my family, we harvested buffalo and we cut meat and we smoked meat and we're tanning hides and we are relearning our relationship with the buffalo. And that Elk Island Park and Métis Crossing and all of these spaces that are stewarding these incredible animals. And I don't really like English very much. Stewarding is not the right word, but it's the closest that I can easily access. And so by being spaces where these animals are living and hopefully thriving, there is a unique opportunity that Parks Canada and all of these other spaces have to help us reclaim our culture. Our culture is still there, but without practicing it, then it's not alive. And that part of our culture could be alive so easily. There are so many who still know these things. We're not that far off. It's not, 300 years of separation yet. We have people in our families who have that glimmer of a memory of how all of these things are done. And so by becoming a space where we can practice culture, where we can heal the land through our very presence with our mother, and we can be healed in turn by her, by being with her, listening to her stories, sitting beside those trees, touching those rocks, eating those berries, that Parks Canada has a potential place of honor in this process. And so what do I want you to know? I want you to look at that space of honor that you could occupy in this beautiful process of reclamation for our people, this beautiful process of healing, because our culture is healing. Connecting with culture heals the traumas of past generations. I know our ancestors, our Chapans, our great-grandparents weep at the beauty when we go and do the things they did, when we experience those parts of our culture that they are responsible for fostering. They are the ones who created these practices. And I know when I see my child doing something that, oh, that's what my dad did, or that's what my grandma does, and I see that in them, let me tell you, there are tears of joy, because I know our culture is continuing. And so there is this incredible opportunity, and I ask you, participate with us in that, create spaces for all of this beauty to come out. The parks are already beautiful, but let's make them culturally rich, beautiful spaces also. So that's what I would want Parks Canada to understand about our culture, is that it's a culture of practice, not performance. We can't just get dressed in capotes and go take a picture in front of the buffalo at Elk Island Park. I mean, we will do that because we love the buffalo so much. However, there is a deep relationship that is possible, that is facilitated by our culture, and you have a role in that. So, hi.
I see that is very powerful, and there's so much to for us all to take away from the sharing so far. Time flies when you're having conversations like this. I just looked at the clock and we have just about 7 or so minutes left of our conversation. I know we could talk all afternoon. But again, a lot to absorb here for those like me who are in listening and learning mode, and just all the gratitude in the world for such generous sharing of knowledge here today and your stories. What I would like to do next is actually, well, first, before we go around, I want to thank Yuri and the video production team, everyone behind the scenes who's making this such a beautiful event for you all to watch. And again, please share your thoughts with us in the chat feature they've set up to use. Métis Own Business that just made the whole process so easy so we could really focus on the stories. So thank you, Marcy. What we're going to do now is a final go around of the circle, but just 1 or 2 minutes on your closing thoughts. just with the interest of time, just anything you want to leave the audience with today, just a minute or two, and then we'll come all the way back around to Elder Rita for your closing thoughts and prayer, and that's where we'll end the circle today. So in light of that, I want to just express my appreciation, my gratitude to you all and to the audience for listening, both people watching live and those that'll continue to watch and learn as new folks join Parks Canada. So if we each want to do just 1 or 2 minutes on closing thoughts, we'll end with Grandmother Rita at the end of the circle, and we'll start with Elder Norma. Thank you.
Yes, in closing thoughts, it's my thoughts that going to this urban park that the city of Edmonton is looking at helping create with Parks Canada. It's such an important thing for our people, having something close to them like that. And I have to apologize because my throat has a tickle right now. But for me, urban parks are very, very important. We need to have these parks for our children and our families and easily accessible. It's not everybody who can afford to go out of town. And so I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody, all the wonderful women that are sitting on this panel. I have a whole couple pages of notes just from listening to you all, because we all bring such different perspective and different knowledge and different thoughts. So it's really what a fulsome table. I hope that Parks Canada and the participants that are on here have learned something, and that it leaves you wanting to learn more and to have a further, longer discussion on land and land use and Métis culture. And I want to take the time to thank Kelsey for putting this together and doing all the legwork, and even going and picking up Grandmother Rita to make sure that she's with us today, which is such an amazing thing to do. And, you know, that we remember that distinctions based, you know, and that we remember that us being on the land is not a detriment. It's a positive thing that we're on the land and working alongside and being the caretakers of our mother. I was at COP15 in Montreal, and one of the things that I heard from one of the gentlemen up on the stage was he was talking about how Mother Earth is angry with us right now. And he's never remembered Mother Earth being angry with us right now, or angry with us, and that she's hurting and that she's sore and that things are happening to her. And we need to make sure that we're not putting bandages on those things, that we are actually caring for them and taking care of that. And that's, I think, that what a relationship with Parks Canada could do is really help make sure that we are maintaining our mother the way we should. So hi, Marcy, and blessed day to everybody.
Merci. For myself also, I guess I'm just grateful for this sitting at l'Étable des Femmes de Chiffre and these conversations and learning and getting those different perspectives, as you said. And to all our listeners from Parks Canada, I know we talk like parks as this entity, and but there's many human beings that make up the work there and do incredible labor. So for those listening that I don't know, good to meet you, and to my friends at Parks, hello. And I know that the question of Métis rights and responsibility also, I was listening, Natalie, like, yes, there's that responsibility and those rights are big questions, and how do we operationalize that within these spaces that are governed by the state. And so I think it's always been, and it will continue to be, through community, through our leaders as women who are holders of, hold that agency and that sovereignty at l'Étable as our household, as the household extends to the land, and the land extends within our household. So I hope also this leads to more conversations and more visiting at l'Étable des Femmes, and so grateful to see you again, Elder Rita, and for Kelsey, and for Grandmother Norma as well. And wish you all a great rest of your afternoon. Merci.
Hi, Cindy. You know, we've had this incredible bundle put in front of you, and our bundles are so sacred and so beautiful, whether it's language bundles, words that are being used, many of which have been used today, bundles of knowledge, of connection to the land. And I want to give you one thing in parting to add to your bundle in your work with the Park Service. And this is for all of us. And so I invite you to engage in this practice. So I had mentioned, you know, that we don't just have pretty words when we say that this is our mother. That's not just pretty words, but that we are truly in relationship with her. And one of the things about humans is that we understand relationships. Well, I should take a step back. Many of us don't understand relationships. However, we understand the concept of relationships that, you know, when I approach another human being, if I have the gift of sight, I see them first and I come to know them by their face. And when I see somebody's face, I'll never forget them. And I will see them again another day and say, I recognize you. I have no clue how we met, but I recognize you. And then I might ask them their name. And then, you know, if I walked up to somebody who I know their face and I know their name and I just take something away from them, they might punch me. They might call the cops. That's theft. It's socially inappropriate. We know that with humans, we shouldn't act that way. And yet with other sovereign beings who have nations, kinship connections, a relationship with the land, and every right to be where they are, we tend to forget about this process of building relationship. And I'm going to invite you, before you next go and harvest a plant, before you next go and pull a fish from the water, in all that you do, before you go and walk on top of plants, that you begin to understand them as beings with a spirit as much as you have a spirit, with a right to exist on their homeland the same as anybody else does, and to build a relationship with them. So if you have the gift of sight, go and look at them, get to know every contour of their bodies. If you have the ability, learn their names. Now, most of us who come from the field of renewable resource management, we know the names. Learn the real names, and I don't mean Latin. Learn the names of the people who lived on that land for that plant, because that's the name it replies to in that place. Spend time. You know, if I get to know somebody and I know their face and I know their name, and then I spend time with them and I express my appreciation for them and I bring them gifts and I tell them how beautiful they are, they're going to be like, oh, I like this person. She can hang out here. That's fine. And then when I go and I ask for something of them, when I go and ask for that berry, or when I ask them to share their gifts or teach me something, they're very likely to feel good about our relationship and to say yes. And that this is the same with every being that exists on the land, that we should be expressing relationship in the same ways. Go sing songs to the plants. I know this is like blowing somebody's mind. Why should I do that? Go sing songs to the plants. Go sit with them. Tell them how beautiful they are. Bring them gifts. Bring them tobacco. And finally, before you do anything with or to them, ask permission. And that is relationship with the land. And that is the perspective that our culture comes with. That's the deep level of respect, that we don't use anything on the land. We exercise our relationships with them in deep honor and respect with those beings. And so I invite you, come and experience our worldview by building relationship with those plants and animals, as though if you have to pretend they're a person, a human person, pretend they're a human person until you recognize they are a plant person, they are an animal person, and that you can build relationships with them in the same way. And then we'll be able to have an incredible discussion about what it looks like for Parks Canada moving forward. And so I invite you to our common practice of relationship with the land, and that's a really good place to start. And I want to say, wow, I'm so grateful for all of you here at this table, all of you watching, everyone who helped organize. I say merci, thank you so much for having me, and miigwech for all the future opportunities to gather and discuss once again. Hey.
Merci, Natalie, and everyone, for your final thoughts. And now we will close with Grandmother Elder Rita's prayers.
Okay. I've been asked to do the closing prayer, and I'm going to keep it on the blessing for the women again. As you know, women are the keepers of the water as they give life. I've thought this over to my prayer to you today, and my prayers in honor of all the grandmothers, mothers, and mothers-to-be for the next 7 generations. Mighty Creator, we ask you to bless all who have gathered here today. And I offer the following prayer to all the keepers of the water, our givers of life who live and who have lived on Turtle Island. When the Creator was creating mothers and was in his 6th day of overtime, a great eagle appeared and said, "You're doing a lot of fiddling around on this one." The Creator said, "Have you read the special order? She must be completely washable, but not plastic. She must run on black coffee and leftovers. She must have a lap that disappears when she stands up, a kiss that can cure anything, from a broken arm to a disappointed love affair, and 6 pairs of hands." The great eagle shook her head slowly and said, "6 pairs of hands? No way. It's not the hands that are causing me problems," said the Creator. "It's the 3 pairs of eyes that mothers have to have." "That's on a standard model?" the great eagle asked. The Creator nodded. "1 pair that sees through doors when she asks, 'What are you kids doing in there?' when she already knows. Another here in the back of her head that sees what she shouldn't, but what she has to know. And of course, the ones here in front. So she can look at a child when he goofs and says, 'I understand and love you,' without so much as uttering a word." "Creator," the great eagle said, touching his sleeve gently, "come to bed. Continue tomorrow." "I can't," said the Creator. "I'm too close to creating something so close to myself. Already I have one that heals herself when she's sick. Can't feed a family of 6 on 1 pound of moose meat and get a 9-year-old to stand under the shower." The great eagle circled the model of a mother very slowly. "It's too soft," she sighed. "But tough," said the Creator excitedly. "You cannot imagine what this mother can do or endure. Can it think? Not only think, but it can reason and compromise," said the Creator. Finally, the great eagle bent over and ran her feathered wing across the cheek. "Here's a leak," she pronounced. "I told you, you were trying to put too much into this model." "It's not a leak," said the Creator. "It's a tear." "What's it for?" "It's for joy, sadness, disappointment, pain, loneliness, and pride." "You're a genius," said the great eagle. The Creator looked sombered and said, "I didn't put it there." Make which to all of you, and may the Creator bless all of you, all my relations. This is dedicated to the memory of all the keepers of the water. May all your tears in future be happy tears. Amen. Thank you, Marcy. Make which we want to make. Thank you.
Merci.
It's true, we are special. I always think that you're special. You're an up and coming, and you're a special. You know so much for your age. I'm so proud to call you my friend.
Oh, it's my honor to call you my friend.
Thank you.
Thank Merci for blessing this event with your prayers. Merci to all of you. And that concludes our event for today.